I am initiating my warhead attack.
Sometime around the genesis of Star Wars' interactivity, when speeders first took to the ice fields of Hoth on the Atari 2600, George Lucas bolstered his Lucasfilm Limited brand by collaborating with Atari and Epyx on two action games called Ball Blazer and Rescue on Fractalus. 2 years later, as Lucasfilm Games, they developed Coronis Rift and the Eidolon and brought in Activision to publish them. Despite some being pirated months before release, these early efforts sold well enough to encourage the young coders to keep crunching data. The first title Lucasfilm Games distributed itself was 1987's Maniac Mansion, developed by Ron Gilbert. Scum, Ron's scripting system that ran the classic Spookfest, laid the foundation for numerous adventure releases that would make the genre synonymous with Lucasfilm and the PC. These text-based treasures included Zack McCracken and the Alien Mindbenders, Loom, The Secret of Monkey Island, and Sam & Max, along with movie tie-ins Labyrinth and Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. During this point-and-click golden era, Totally Games founder Lawrence Holland was experimenting with flight simulation, starting with PHM Pegasus and Strike Fleet in '87. In 1988, Lucasfilm Games began a World War II air combat trilogy with Battlehawks 1942. The following sequels, Their Finest Hour, The Battle of Britain, and Secret Weapons of the Luftwaffe, perpetuated the series' legacy of historical accuracy and extensive educational content. In 1990, Industrial Light & Magic, Skywalker Sound, and the games division of Lucasfilm reorganized to create LucasArts Entertainment. In the 13 years since Star Wars descended on the masses, around 10 games were made in its name, and none of them were created by Lucas-employed developers. In 1993, Holland designed a completely 3D engine to bring the Rebellion fleet into battle and present an uncompromising look at space combat in the Star Wars universe. X-Wing Space Combat Simulator starred lesser-known hero Kian Farlander, whose name is never mentioned in the game, but referenced in the strategy guide by a novella called The Farlander Papers. He would be featured again in the expanded fiction, including the new Jedi Order series. The plot centered around an immense effort on behalf of the Rebellion to gain an edge against the Empire by discovering, stealing, and protecting the plans for the Death Star. X-Wing began with recruiting allies sympathetic to the cause and ended with the suicidal assault on the massive space station. While sitting in the cockpit of a T-65 was something gamers had done before, their progress was usually charted in one predetermined direction, and their offensive options were limited to lasers and torpedoes. X-Wing on PC, like the air combat classics it emulated, was a free-flying sim where every last button and knob aboard the craft was yours to twist and tweak. Pilots could manage power resources like engines and deflector shields, link their laser cannons, cycle through available targets on both sides of the fight, command wingmen, choose a handful of alternate viewpoints, and select additions like ion cannons and concussion missiles. Missions provided a chunk of the cosmos to navigate and a list of objectives to finish. Completing each tour involved dogfighting with the Imperial elite, escorting or capturing freighters, and initiating large-scale operations against capital ships. Winning scored you medals and sly winks from Alliance founder Mon Mothma. Failing either meant falling into the hands of the Empire or being given a hero send-off into the void of space. Along with the titular starfighter, players also strapped into Y-Wings and A-Wings. Each craft could further be explored on pilot proving grounds or in historical missions showcasing significant battles in the Star Wars timeline. And mission movies could be captured during combat and replayed later. Two more expansions, or Tours of Duty, were added to the fray in 1994, each encompassing 20 missions and bringing the conflict closer to the events in The Empire Strikes Back. Imperial Pursuit started with the evacuation of Yavin 4, and B-Wing introduced the T-shaped craft and concluded with the construction of Echo Base on Hoth. Rumors of a sixth campaign plus a snowspeeder expansion spread throughout the band of PC trainees, but neither was ever deployed. Prior Star Wars video games had received critical success, but X-Wing was the first to win several awards, including Best Sim, Sci-Fi, and Overall Game of the Year. It was perhaps the most impressive example at the time of the iMuse dynamic music system, created by Michael Land and Peter McConnell. The engine synchronized the music tracks to accompany the player's actions, effectively letting pilots rewrite a MIDI version of John Williams' Academy Award-winning work and compose a completely unique score. X-Wing was originally sold on 5 3.5-inch floppy disks, but was re-released on CD-ROM and a collector's edition in 1994 and again in 1998. X-Wing let any rebel rookie with a mouse, keyboard, or joystick take on the Empire and make a difference in the galaxy. But as Episode 5 began, things looked bleak for Princess Leia and her hidden resistance. After the embarrassing destruction of the Death Star and death of Grand Moff Tarkin, the Emperor's forces doubled their efforts to eliminate the dangerous uprising. In July of 1994, LucasArts released the first game ever that allowed players to take the side of the Galactic Empire. TIE Fighter followed central character Marek Steele, whose name was once again only revealed in an additional short story titled The Steel Chronicles. Unlike Kean Farlander, he would not be mentioned again in the extended novels and comics to follow. From the seat of a twin-ion engine Imperial fighter, Marek had a unique perspective on the scenes from episodes 5 and 6. Steele's empire was a beacon of peace and justice, trying to stamp out a rebel alliance bent on creating chaos and disorder. The story traveled through 7 different systems across nearly 30 missions. Medals were again awarded for dutiful service, but select missions also gave you the chance to work for Palpatine personally. A cloaked figure in the briefing room would sometimes have additional requests on behalf of the Emperor, and these goals would often detract you from your primary objectives. None of them were mandatory, but loyally following them granted you access into a secret sect called the Emperor's Hand, with a glowing tattoo as your sign of progress. The primary antagonists were the fleeing rebel forces, but later missions revealed 2 traitorous threats. One was Admiral Harkov, Marek's commanding officer during the first 4 tours of duty. Harkov made the mistake of selling supplies to both sides of the Galactic War, and defecting once his actions were discovered. The other was Grand Admiral Zarin, one of the minds behind the TIE Advanced, Defender, and Avenger, 3 ships featured prominently in the game. Zarin attempted a risky coup d'etat on the Otega system by trying to capture the Emperor, who was no stranger to being kidnapped, and hold him aboard his flagship Glory. Thanks to Steele's efforts, neither of these plots against the Empire was successful. With Zarin on the run, a Chiss officer named Mithra Nuruodo, or Thrawn for short, assumed the position of Grand Admiral. First appearing in Timothy Zahn's Heir to the Empire in May of 1991, the Crimson-Eyed Commander is arguably the most popular expanded universe character, as evidenced by his name being mentioned or likeness reproduced in the War Sim Rebellion, the MMORPG Galaxies, the RTS Empire at War, the PSP exclusive Renegade Squadron, and a dizzying amount of expanded novels. Marek continued his Imperial service in Defender of the Empire, an expansion pack that included 3 more tours of duty. As the title suggested, Marek secured TIE Defender technology from Zarin and piloted the craft for the majority of the extra content. A second expansion, Enemies of the Empire, was planned for the following year, but the bonus material was instead compiled in the Collector's Edition of TIE Fighter, released in 1995. The last 3 tours investigated the Bothan connection to the rebellion Mon Mothma alludes to in Return of the Jedi, and brought about an abrupt end to Zarin's opposition. TIE Fighter's perspective and undeniable polish earned it placement in several Hall of Fame collections and top PC games lists. X-Wing loaded you into the Rebel fighter with all the bells and whistles, and TIE Fighter put the infamous flyby screeching noise and lasers in your direct control. But with online gaming blowing up, fans were dying to play against each other and prove their space superiority once and for all. Stripping away the story, LucasArts opened up the arena for 4 to 8 players and let pilots choose which side they felt deserved to win the galaxy. X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter launched in 1997 with 8 missions for each opposing army. The iMuse MIDI sound system was dropped in favor of a CD soundtrack, and the visuals got a high-resolution bump with improved textures. Asteroids were also included to add elements to an otherwise barren battlefield. Pilots could now choose which craft type or squadron they wanted to join, instead of being assigned one due to specific mission criteria. Unlike its celebrated predecessors, and despite the growing online community, X-Wing vs. TIE Fighter got below-average review scores due to a lack of any kind of progressive narrative. The single-player content the game had served merely to train gamers for the multiplayer battles. It only took LucasArts 6 months to rectify this, however, with the November release of Balance of Power. Surpassing the original game it expanded, Balance of Power added dual campaigns with 15 missions each, another full-scale battle, and the ability to pilot B-Wings. The plot focused on a skirmish in the Aram sector, which pitted Rogue Squadron against Task Force Vengeance, under the command of Admiral Wu Yu-sen. The game didn't present its position in the grand timeline, other than hints that it took place before the Battle of Endor, but after the introduction of the TIE Avenger. Its commitment to canon is also near impossible to calculate, as there are 2 possible outcomes to every dogfight. Charting the course of the classic trilogy, the X-Wing series had several chapters left to fill, specifically the Rebellion perspective during the events of TIE Fighter, leading up to the death of the Emperor. Once again introducing an unknown pilot to the war effort, 1999's X-Wing Alliance starred Ace Azamin, smuggler and pilot of a Corellian transport similar to the Millennium Falcon. After delivering Bacta to the rebel troops, the Azamin home was raided and Ace was forced to join the underground forces. Alliance was the first in the series to feature full voice acting and in-game dialogue upon release, as the other games received this upgrade in subsequent compilations. Boarding with other ships became possible, and doing so was required in multiple operations. There were 7 battles included, each with 6 or 7 missions. Some of them stretched over several star systems, linked by a manual hyperspace jump. Along with medals, Ace collected various trinkets to commemorate his achievements, and could receive messages to update the player on the Azamin family's whereabouts. To offer the complete package, Alliance also ran multiplayer sequences on Microsoft servers that lasted until 2004. Even when these were shut down, providers like Errant Venture and Battlestats stepped forward to continue the conflict. There are still pilots waging war today. Even though X-Wing Alliance was the only space flight sim from LucasArts to never receive a sequel or collector's edition, several fan upgrade sites popped up that modded the game to include improved textures, along with added ships and scenarios. It's been almost a decade since the last installment in the X-Wing saga, and in that time, no Star Wars flight game has come close to replicating the depth Lawrence Holland programmed into a mouse and keyboard. The X-Wing and TIE Fighter games arrived at a time when the PC was pushing the performance envelope for the industry, and jumped online right when a joystick and a modem became inseparable for would-be fighter pilots. The three heroes, Kian, Marek, and Ace, may not have showed their faces in the classic trilogy, but as the canon dictates, their crosshairs changed the galaxy forever. Suit up in 2 weeks as the Retrospective goes to war. The only men and women more important than the brave souls on the battlefield were the Force commanders that put them there. The struggles and sacrifices of an empire at war were plotted on galactic battlegrounds and through the charging armies of a never-ending battlefront.